Welcome everybody to our WSO webinar on using your class profile report for planning small groups. Please feel free to type any questions you have in the chat box. I am Sherry Howard, Project Director for Best Practices Training, and with me today is Jennifer Cluley. We're going to start out just showing you through screenshots what the class profile report looks like and how to access it in work sampling. You'll see here your home screen. You'll go to that third tab called Reports. Click on the gray box, Manage Reports, and then under that tab, click on Generate Reports. Once you do that, you'll see this screen with 4 choices. Class Ratings is another report that you can use, but the Class Profile report is our favorite. Click on Class Profile, and you will get these 3 drop-down options. You'll select your grade level, which is Preschool 4. We are in Period 1. And then you can either select all domains or just click on a specific domain that you're interested in looking at. Here you see the mathematical thinking domain, and you'll see the P4 indicators there on the left-hand side. And these are the checklist ratings that you have made up to this point. Jennifer is going to talk us through the ratings and what that looks like. Jennifer, start out with that not yet rating.
So you look at that and you know for these 4 children, Nathan, Quinshow, Raina, and Smith, I want to continue to find ways to teach that and really working with them for them to learn that concept. So you're looking at those not yet ratings and thinking about those 4 children. If I think about those other 2, that kind of in process and proficient, what I may want to think about is starting to plan my small groups. And that really is the beauty of this report. And that's why you want to use the class profile report, is to think about, as I'm planning my small groups, I may want to pull in those 4 in-process children and pull them in with my proficient children and kind of set up what we call a heterogeneous group, meaning that I'm going to plan that small group for children that will challenge those in-process children, to challenge my children that are proficient and encourage them to continue to practice. As we go across and look at this report, you see those 10 children that are in that no response column. And what that tells me as a teacher is that for those 10 children, I have not made a checklist rating for this particular indicator. So I need to make a plan. I need to plan, how am I going to collect evidence and how am I going to have that evidence so that I can make a rating for children on this particular indicator. So that kind of breaks down that class profile report as we talk through it. And we're going to continue to look at this as we go through our session today. So remember, we talked about MAP. If you've been in any training with Sherry and I, any assessment training, we've introduced you to MAP. And I want to walk you through how to use that MAP document and using your class profile report to plan an activity. So let's think about, I look at that class profile report and I know that I need to assess, shows beginning understanding of number and quantity. So remember with MAP, as we've talked about it, we've talked about you've got your GELDS indicators on the left, you've got your P4 indicators on the right. I am going to find that P4 indicator, and you'll see it. We've got a red box around it that is showing beginning understanding of number and quality. And when I kind of reverse it back to the GELDS, I know that I am then teaching quickly recognizes and names how many items are in a set up to 4 items. So we're going to reverse our assessment back to the GELDS so that I know what I want to assess, and now I know kind of what I want to be teaching as well. And then I can go to Peach to find an activity idea. Remember in Peach, I can search by that JELDS indicator. So I'm going to put in CD because math comes under that cognitive development domain, and I have to include that when I'm searching. So CD MA 1.4E, that's that JELDS code I'm wanting to teach. And when I do that and click the pink search button, it's going to come up with all of those activities that have already been linked to that indicator. And notice I've gone ahead and chosen Roll-A-Monster, which is one of my favorite math games to play with children. And Roll-A-Monster is so simple, and we're going to talk through this activity, and we're going to talk about how can we use this same activity and differentiate it for different groups of students. So, of course, Peach has that explanation. You can add this to your lesson plan, and then you're ready to think about how am I going to assess it and how am I going to do this in my classroom. So, Sherry, let's talk about that. How do we do this in our classroom?
Thanks, Jennifer. And Jennifer is going to add that URL shortly into the chat box so that you guys know where this resource is found on our website as well. This is one of the games on our website under math. So you design your matrix. We've talked about this a little bit in new lead teacher training. So if you'll look here, beginning of the year, we're going to just use one die. If your children are pretty proficient in counting, again, look at that differentiation. You guys had a lot of questions about differentiation. So using one die versus two die is a very easy way to differentiate. So we're using one die to start out with. So I have those numerals across the top, 1 through 6. I have my students' names on that left-hand side. And then I just put an S or a C because what we are going to observe and assess is subitizing, right? If they're able to recognize that numeral on the die without counting the dots. And then if they're able to count out the correct number of body parts. And if you remember from new lead teacher training, we're going to use just those two codes. We're going to put a check mark for, yep, I got it, and NH if they needed help. So that's our matrix. And then here's what the cards look like when you log in and see that resource. When children roll that die, you'll see a 1 stands for an eye, a 2 stands for a mouth, and so on. And then you'll see the direction card as well. We're using different colored die and different sizes. We're using one for counting and one for subitizing. So in Peach, if you have logged in and created an account, it does give you the ability to plan your small groups right there. So you'll see if you have a class and there's your children, once you've clicked on this activity, Roll-A-Monster, you can see your students' names below, and that's how you can form your small groups, which would be based on your class profile report, again, which I'm going to show you in just a second. You can also choose the type of assessment that you're going to do. So it says here that we're going to do a matrix by the lead teacher. What you're looking at the top of the screen gets a little funny when it's out of context, but that is the class profile report that Jennifer just showed you. She's just clipped that one section of it. So there you see the indicator again, shows beginning understanding of number and quantity. There's the children and not yet in process, proficient, and so on. Below that, you'll see a small group template. So what I'm going to do, if you're teaching in a traditional way, this is one example of how you might want to do that. So on Monday, my small groups, I'm going to pull those 4 children that are not yet. Sometimes we want to create that homogeneous group of children that really need some remediation. They really need some help with that one-to-one correspondence. And I'm going to also create special dies, and we're only going to go 1 through 3. When children are really struggling with counting, just keep the numbers to a very minimum. Give them those really large die, serve a great purpose to help with one-to-one correspondence because they can place materials directly onto the die, onto the dots if needed to help support them with that one-to-one. So there's my JELDS indicator. Again, we are using one for subitizing, one for counting. So I've put both of those JELDS indicators on my small group lesson plan. So there's what we're doing for Monday. On Tuesday, I've chosen to pull some children in from my in-process group, as well as from my no response. Now, it's a little more difficult looking at this blindly, right? But you know your students. So even though you have not made a checklist rating, that's what Jennifer said, that's what that column means. You have no rating. You may have some idea of kind of where they'd fall doing this activity. So you make your judgment. If it's, you're really not sure, just pull some children in. What's great about playing a game like this is you can easily differentiate in the moment. You see a child struggling, just pass them that 1 through 3 die instead of the 1 through 6. Children can play with different die. If you want to make some really great heterogeneous groups, you can give, several children at your table 2 die, some children 1 die, and they can all play together. So that's what Tuesday looks like. Wednesday, I'm going to pull some more my proficient children in with some more of my no response children. And you see there, I'm using 2 die. So again, those children are already proficient. So we know they are ready for that. Maybe I feel like those children in no response are ready for that. But again, I can pull 1 die from them and it's very easy to do. Then Thursday, I want you to notice I've pulled back in my 4 not yet children. They need practice. So that's what we're doing. We're pulling them back in for small group. We're adding a proficient child. That peer teaching often works really well. And then we're pulling our other 2 children from no response. So that's one example of how you can differentiate across the week. Again, you could put 2 of those. You could put Wednesday and Thursday with your co-teacher and do 2 small groups, Monday and Tuesday. This is not saying how you should run your small groups. This is just one example of how you can do it. We're going to show you now the virtual small group instruction where you're meeting with children daily. You could do this with your co-teacher and meet with all children. So just looking at a couple of different examples and what that may look like. So what do we do next? We're going to play the game. First, we have to gather our materials. We have the mouths available to print on our website. And everything else are just materials you can gather. The legs and the body are made out of fun foam. The horns are just craft sticks. The hair is pipe cleaners. We've used googly eyes. We've used straws for the arms. Substitute any of that with whatever you have. If you have some concerns, you can certainly individually bag materials for sanitation purposes. Very easy to do. Put the child's name on that plastic bag, and then they're only touching their materials depending on your program requirements. These are also simple enough that you could bag up materials and send them home for children for virtual instruction if you have that ability to.
I'm sorry, the pattern for the body is also included in the download as well. So you've got a template to cut out that body as well.
All right, so let's play the game. So how we're going to play is we're using the blue die to determine which body part we get. And then we're going to roll the large red die. Again, I said earlier that larger die, you can use that 1-to-1 correspondence support if needed. And that's how we'll count out that number of body parts. Let's take a roll and look at there. Raj says I rolled a blue 3 and a red 4. So he is going to put 4 hairs on his monster. This is a really fun game for around this time of year too. A lot of people like to do it near Halloween. So there you see just 4 pipe cleaners. He was able to count those out correctly. So what will we do next? We will put that on our matrix. So we've checked off Raj for subitizing and for counting. So you would continue to play that game and go around and let the children continue as long as the interest lasts. The monster bodies actually turn out really funny. We have an example here of what they could look like. So you just mark it off, keep playing with the children, and they might have 10 eyes, and that's okay. 25 hairs on it, So then if you have children that are a little bit higher level and more proficient, you can then have them count everything together at the end. You can take it wherever you want, but children really love to play it. There's the example, a little 4-eyed monster, 1-armed, 1-horned.
I feel a song coming up.
Oh, good thing we have Sarah on.
Sarah can make us a song about this.
A four-eyed, one-horned. Okay. As you see here, my matrix has lots of markings on it, lots of check marks, some needs help kind of across the board. So if you remember from newly teacher training, how we enter that matrix is by the column. So we would go in and enter all of the children who were able to subitize. Then we would go in for number one. Then we would go in and make an entry for all of the children who needed help subitizing for the numeral one. What you can do, because that sounds like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of matrices. What you can do is if there are patterns, right? Which if you look at the kind of the ones, twos, threes, we have a lot more that are able to do it. You can combine those and you would say able to subitize 1, 2, 3, and 4, able to count 1 through 3 if you had a group of children that can do that. So hopefully that's not confusing people as I say that. As I said, we're going to go live and that may make it a little simpler. All right, let's check the chat box. Sarah put that Roll a Monster resource in there for you. Thank you, Sarah.
I do see a couple of questions, Sherry, but you may have already answered one. Since we are only documenting language and literacy and math, do all of our checklists need to be at 100%?
At the end of the rating period, yes. We're still rating in all domains. So you'll still rate all 73 indicators if you can. They are giving some allowances, certainly, and you can use that D&O. But when you rate someone D&O, it also will count toward that 100% completion.
So far, that's the only question I see in the chat box. But as we're going through, you guys, if you do have questions, please go ahead and put those in because we'll spend some time trying to answer those as well. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to go live in and kind of walk you through the process that we just did. So I'm going to actually change up my screen just a little bit for you. Remember, we talked about how we kind of go through this process. So we want to go in and do the class profile report, which is where I'm going to start. And remember, Sherry said to do the class profile report, we are going to start with, let me make that a little bit bigger. Can y'all see that okay? Make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go to Manage Reports and click on Generate Reports. I am going to come up here and choose my class. So there's my Panda class ID. I'm going to say Class Profile. I'm going to choose my grade level Preschool 1, Period 1, and select a domain. And remember, Sherry said that usually when I'm planning, we select all domains. I'm going to do a language and literacy example with you, so I'm just going to select that domain. And what you will notice is I have all of my indicators and how my children are rated. So I'm going to scroll through here, and I am actually going to come down to C4. So this is language and literacy C4. Recounts some key ideas and details from text. So that's the one I really want to look at, because when I look at my class profile report, I see I have 4 students that are not yet, 4 that are in process, 3 that are proficient, and 10 that have not been rated yet. So I want to think about that and how can I plan those small groups. I am going to show you, this is that reverse correlations that we've shared with you before. So remember, we talked about you can use this alongside with your map. On the left-hand side are your WSO indicators. On the right-hand side of are your GELs. So if I want to assess the WSO indicator, language and literacy C4, recount some key ideas and details from text, I can come straight across and I can see those are my JELDS indicators that links to. So as I'm looking at this, I am going to start looking for some activities to do in my classroom. So what's the best place to go to find those activities? I'm going to go in Peach. So I'm just going to open a new tab, and I am going to go to Peach, and I am just going to explore Peach and search by JELDS indicator. So remember, we said it's really easy to come in here and type in that JELDS code. So I'm actually going to do communication, language, and literacy. So 5.4C. Let me take out that CLL 5.4C, which is communication, language, and literacy, standard 5. I'm looking in this 48 to 60 month age group, and I'm looking at that indicator C. And Peach is going to search and find all of those activities that have been linked to that indicator. And remember, when you're in Peach, I can hover over that indicator and it will give me a reminder of what that JELDS indicator is. And so when I was looking at my WSO indicator and linking it back to a JELDS indicator, I wanted to choose something around a book activity I could do with my children. So this discusses books or stories read aloud and can identify characters and setting in a story. And let's look at several of those. You'll notice there's about 10 different activities, and I'm just going to choose one of those. So I might choose that book jacket draw. And I love this activity. We've done something similar to this in some of our trainings with teachers, where we bring in book covers and we ask teachers to make up a story based on the cover of the book. What do you think this book's about? And it's the same thing you do with children. So you have different book covers, maybe familiar stories that they know. You could do this in the writing center. You could do it in small group, but you're going to have children draw and write about the story. And so I would do that in a couple of different ways. Let's look at this example. Let's say one of the book covers I chose was Not Norman. If you're not familiar with this story, I love this book. Not Norman is about a little boy that gets a goldfish for his birthday. He wanted a pet, and his parents gave him a goldfish. And he really kind of struggles in the beginning because he's like, that goldfish can't run. It can't really play. It can't sleep in his bed with him like a little puppy could. So he has this idea that he's going to trade this goldfish. He's going to take it back to the pet store. He's going to trade with a friend. And it's a really cute story. He ends up keeping his goldfish because he really decides he loves it. And it's a very sweet story. But you could do something like this. When I think about grouping my children, I could do that same activity, but in different ways with my children. Just like we talked about with that math activity, I may pull in my not yet students and just have them draw something they remember about the story and tell me about it. I may pull in those in process children and really have them try to recount 2 or 3 facts from the story. For my children that are more proficient, if I'm pulling in some of those no response children and grouping them together, it may be I'm looking for them to do more of the sequence of the story. So there's lots of ways you could use that particular indicator to teach in different ways and using that same activity, which really, it saves you time if you can take that activity and kind of that idea and use it in different ways to meet the needs of children in your classroom. So let's say that I've done that in my classroom and I have some evidence I've collected. So remember, Sherry and I, if you were with us during that first session, we kind of went through entering the observations and work samples, but I wanted to review that with you again, just so you can kind of see how I take that work sample that children do during these small groups or during center time, whenever you're having them kind of do this activity. Really during small group would be the best, and enter that observation or that work sample. So remember, for my home screen, in order to enter evidence, I'm going to come on this home screen to enter observations and work samples. I have my work sample. Let me grab it for you so you can see what I'm going to be uploading. Here's my Not Norman work sample. This is one that a pre-K teacher shared with me after they did a similar activity. So I wanted to be sure you see what we're going to be attaching. And what you'll notice is the child did lots of drawing, talked about they are at the park. He's trying to get a new pet. He wants a dog. And this was Ashton, and Ashton wrote her name several times on here. So that's the work sample we're going to be using. So I'm going to come in here and we're going to pretend that I have an Ashton in my class. This is our practice classroom, so I don't really have Ashton in my class, but I'm going to go ahead and choose Aziz. Remember, we said you don't have to click done here after you've selected your children. You certainly can if you want to. I am going to come up here and change this to period 1 because we're in period 1. Remember the title, we want you to keep it simple. We want you to say, if it's a work sample, just say WS for work sample. And again, remembering that we only have to upload evidence for language and literacy and mathematical thinking. In my description, because you noticed on that work sample I showed you, we've already written the dictation on there. So I don't have to rewrite that in my description. I don't have to say, Ashton drew a picture of Not Norman after reading the book Not Norman. We're just going to put in that description, Not Norman. I am going to add that attachment. So that it's there that I can go back to and look at anytime. And then I'm going to link it to performance indicators. Of course, knowing that this is language and literacy, that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to go through those performance indicators in language and literacy and start to make some links. Remember, we said that question mark means that's where those P4 developmental guidelines are. And I can look at those and review those and decide if that's something I want to link it to. So I can go through there, read that, and decide, yes, I want to link it to that, or I want to keep going to something else maybe. So I'm going to link it to Show's Appreciation and Understanding of Books. I'm going to link it to C4, recount some key ideas and details from text. I would look at early writing and think about that and read through some of those. Again, clicking on that question mark, reading through that rationale and looking at those examples and deciding, yes, I want to link it to D1. Uses letter-like shaped symbols and letters to convey meaning, definitely linking there, and understanding the purposes for writing. And I would link it there. I might decide, I'm going to click next, and I review those. And I may decide, even though I don't have to have evidence in other domains, such as social studies, I could still look there and go ahead and link it if I think it's a really good example. So that's what I want to do. I want to go into social studies, and I want to link it to social studies D1, describes the locations of things in the environment. And once I've done that, I can say next. I'm going to say done. Again, there are my links. And the biggest thing I want to remember to do is click save. And when I've done that, you will see on this evidence summary screen, there's my work sample, Not Norman. I did it for Aziz. There's my attachment. I can see a little thumbnail of that. And I linked that piece of evidence to 6 indicators. Okay, Sherry, do we have other questions?
We do. Can you use a work sample several times? For example, writing, math, etc.
Absolutely. So you would upload it one time and link it in those different domains, just like I just did for language and literacy and social studies.
So you wouldn't upload the same work sample for the same child several times. You would just link it to all the different domains.
Yes, the one time you enter that piece of evidence.
Somebody asked if Peach was on the best practices website. I did put in that web address if you want to grab it. Peach is peach.decal.ga.gov.
So I haven't heard that much from teachers yet this year, but I think that you've given some very, very good examples, and it's a lot. This is heavy when it's new to you. So I'm glad that you're recording it so that they can go back and look at it again, and if needed. But I think these were excellent examples, and that's exactly how to do it.
A couple of people are asked if we can show the resources in math and language. And somebody also asked, can you show us how to find math again?
Sure, I'm happy to. We also have Jennifer McCreary and Jill Vandebos on as two of our decal consultants, if y'all have anything you want to add as well.
One thing, just while Jennifer's pulling up the website, I do want to say is, having children draw work samples is such a way to get rich quality documentation, especially when they're open-ended like that. So never hesitate. Think about, you had 10 children in that no response column. That's a big flag. Like, you need to get some evidence in there. So just pull those 10 children into small groups and have them all produce something. And then that will give you some information to make that initial checklist rating. Whether they're able to only mention one character in a story, or maybe you have a child who's, drawing maybe is not very good, but the elaborate story they tell you is amazing. So just record all that conversation. Children kind of do that very differently. So work samples are just a really great way to get at that.
And I think one of the things we hear a lot when we are doing face-to-face training and we talk about assessment is teachers, I don't know if it's a perception or what, but a lot of times, we talk a lot about introducing things, introducing concepts, introducing ideas and activities in small group. But remember, still extend it out into centers, because give them lots of opportunities to continue to practice in centers and things like that. So do it in small group and then move those materials into a center and let children continue to have that opportunity to practice and observe and do this kind of thing. So just like the activity Roll a Monster or the book cover activity, definitely do that in small group, and then let children because they love, a lot of times you'll find children, they're playing teacher and one's telling the other one how to do it. And so there's lots of learning that goes on beyond that we want to capture as well. And they continue to practice, and you want to just make sure we're very intentional in paying attention to that as well.
One thing I wanted to point out to teachers, if your books do not have book covers because you've taken them all off, just place that book on your copy machine. Doesn't have to be in color. Just make a copy of it. You can laminate them and bind them all together if you want, or you can keep them separate. You can keep them on a ring. Do all the favorites, and then you can do some unfamiliar ones too, and that really encourages them to make up their own stories.
I've seen teachers do them on a smartboard even. If you wanted to pull your small group over to your carpet area, if you've got a smartboard, and if you're teaching virtually, hold it up to the camera and let children see it as you're holding it up to the camera, or show them two and have them pick one. That's one of the ideas that we've shared in our podcast about virtual teaching, was just thinking of ways that you can show children something on the camera and then have them do an activity from there. So you ask about the resources. Sarah put our web address in the chat box as well, but it's Best Practices Training. And when you come to our website, you can get to it two ways. So we have the big button that's about a third of the way down. You also have a drop-down menu here of resources. So if I click there, you'll notice we have these in categories. And a lot of what Sherry and I talk about in these webinars is in that assessment bucket, as we call it. So click on assessment. Again, if you are needing that step-by-step, I know somebody that joined us early said, I missed the first webinar. Can I see that? We'll share that recording, but that WSO handout is here. That will help you with that step-by-step. There's the Peach how-to guide. If you're not familiar with using Peach, Sarah created this for us, and it is amazing because Peach, this takes you through step by step, screenshot by screenshot, everything you need to do to be successful in using Peach. We have those matrices booklets that we've talked about. And then here is the map document. So there's different versions of the map, but the most recent one, we converted it to an 8.5 by 11. So it's called condensed. And it's my personal favorite because I love that it prints on regular size paper. And it really, it's done by week. So I can look at week 1 and then week 2 and then week 3. But there's also other versions if you wanted it sorted by that P4. It's also in an Excel spreadsheet that you can use. If you're a really good Excel person, you can sort it all different ways. And then we have our little short tutorial videos that we've created, as well as that quick correlation guide that we do use sometimes as well. And Sarah's putting some links to some of those in the chat box for us. So you also asked about language and literacy and math games. So that language and literacy bucket, we have lots of games here that you can do. We have syllable cards, Three Bears writing game, those kind of things. And then in our math bucket, we have all kinds of fun games for you to play. What I love about these is that they are all activities you can do with things you already have in your classroom. So just using small game pieces, small manipulatives, those kind of things, construction paper, that kind of stuff. So there's that Roll-A-Monster that Sherry talked about earlier. You just click on that, tell it you want to download it, and I'm going to pull that up for you. And there it is. So for children to play, you need a monster body, you need die, 1 die or 2 die, depending on how you're doing it. And there's your directions. There's all those cute little mouths. There's the monster body, that template you can cut out. And a lot of our games have the matrix that goes along with it. So you're able to have that all together, and it's super, super easy for you. So we have lots and lots of math games for you to play. The other thing that I think we showed you in one of our other sessions, but if you weren't with us, for those of you that are teaching virtually, in the Family Connections section of our website under resources, we have lots of placemats for families to do with their children. So there's a math placemat that we can look at. And all that is just, it prints on an 8.5 by 11 and just gives families ideas of some ways they can reinforce some of these skills at home as well.
Jennifer, I'm going to answer a question in the chat box. It says, does the Peach website have activities that are specifically created for small group, or should we modify the activities for small group? So it's funny that you say that. When all of the activities were initially uploaded into Peach, we had them in those categories. But then we realized so many of them could be done. You hate to categorize it as small group and it not be open for center time or, you know, those kind of things. So we went in and we took all of that out. And what we did is we just added the language in the body of the activity. So it'll talk about the activities such as Roll-A-Monster, and then it says a little phrase at the end, this can be done in small group. So I just went in, and if you just click explore and type in small group, it pulls up, it looked like about 100 activities. So those are more geared to small group, but again, lots of them can be adapted to. So it's going to take a minute, Jennifer. There's a lot of them.
Okay. I'll let it search while we keep talking. I think another question came up in the chat box, Sherry.
Okay. It says, how do you decide which group will be teacher directed and which one will be independent? Can you please give some examples? Kazi,
one of my when I used to go into classrooms and really work with teachers one-on-one, one of my biggest things I would say to teachers is looking at activities, independent activities. You've got to make sure it's something children can do independently. So you would think that's very intuitive, but teachers sometimes really struggle with that. And I was in a classroom one day, looked at the lesson plans, and the independent group was like something about dictating or recording. And I'm like, they need somebody to dictate to, because me and Sherry are in a group together. Can Sherry write down what I'm saying? So you need to think about what are some things that children can do independently, and making sure that to me was one of my biggest pet peeves about.
A general rule of thumb is you teach children in small group and then you give it to them independently later. Right. So teach them how to play Roll a Monster, and then you can make it an independent activity, or they can play it then at center time. So it just depends on your children and what they're really capable of doing.
Yeah, don't give them something brand new and expect them to be able to do it with no modeling that's been done before that. So Jennifer or Jill or Jan, do any of y'all have any comment on that?
Devin just joined us too.
Oh, Devin's on too.
One thing I thought of a while ago is, and especially since you just mentioned about dictation or recording of what a child says, at first I would get so anxious because I'd have an activity where they were drawing something and I didn't know how to plan how much time to make sure that I did have the opportunity to capture everybody's stories through in their dictation. And then I realized I don't have to ask them all right then. Right. Children remember what they drew, and you could ask them during nap time. You could call one over and say, what were you thinking here, or whatever, and they'll still know their story even the next day or whatever. So don't worry about, don't get as anxious as I did about trying to get it all done, because that'll drive you crazy.
That's a great tip, Jan. That's what we share with teachers in our regular WSO training. Same thing. You'll remember days later.
Hey, can y'all hear me? This is Jill.
Hey, Jill.
Hey, this is awesome. I will tell y'all, I think one of the things the question was about with independent activities. I think that's one of the things that when I was in the classroom, it was like finding something that they could do that they weren't saying, hey, Miss Jill, look and see. But I think one of the things I did was having a follow-up activity, something that we'd already studied, where they could really research some more. And they would know that once they were done, they could talk to their friends about it. Because that was a big issue that I had. They would want to tell me, they would want to show me. And that's something that I learned to do. And it worked out well, that they would talk to one another and discuss. And I would give them some ideas about questions to ask one another once they were finished.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Hey, this is Devin. Hopefully I'm connected enough that it will hear me. I was just going to say too about the independent groups. I've been telling teachers a lot lately that, it's scary to start that independent group, but even if you just start it with 2 children and let 2 children work together on a puzzle, or let 2 children work with math initiatives that they've been working with already, it just gives them that opportunity to see what it's like to be without the teacher, and to see what it's like to just work with one other friend or something like that, or even on their own, just work alongside somebody else. And then you can slowly start to add that independent group, but giving them the chance to kind of see what it's like, I think is huge. And really starting out with something that they already know how to do. That's not even necessarily, it could be academic based, but it could also just be social emotional kinds of things, where they're just learning to share and work together and cooperate on something like a puzzle. Is a great way also to kind of get those independent groups going. So I just thought I'd throw that out there too.
No, that's great. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you.
And I do think the more experience and the more you really start looking at activities, you'll kind of start to get a sense of, this is something I really kind of it needs a little more teacher direction. And this is something I can build and model and then turn them loose in an independent activity. And Devin makes a great point. You have to kind of start, as you are learning more about your children, who's ready to work independently versus who are those you need kind of still pretty close by to you, because we know that some children need a little bit longer before they're ready to work independently.
It also depends on assessment. If you need assessment data on children, then do a teacher-directed activity to make sure you get it.
So sorry, Kazi, there's just really no magic answer. It's just, it's a lot of things to think about.
She says, do I have to do small group 5 days a week? Is there any certain rules in Georgia pre-K?
So my recommendation would be to look at those IQ guides and let that guide you, because there are frequently asked questions about small group activities that will really help you kind of get more at that intent. But if any of our consultants want to speak up about that, you're welcome to. But I find those frequently asked questions so helpful, and I refer back to those very often. But I do think it is expected that you do small groups.
But Cassie, also understand that small group does not mean, I think a lot of new teachers in particular really overthink small group. That's why we like to show a lot of examples using the same materials, because otherwise teachers spend hours and hours and hours and hours on end planning small groups for this week, trying to differentiate with different games and different things. And you're making it way more complicated than it needs to be. A lot of times we'll do that for 4 days. Friday, a small group can be a cooking activity. Small groups can be fun. They don't have to be a hardcore teacher directed, something. So consider adding those kind of things as well.
And Devon's adding some things to the chat box, and she concurred that it is 5 days a week. It's part of the routine of your day. It's built into that daily schedule. And so you don't want to lose out that chunk of your daily schedule. And again, we know routine is so important to our children. So how you kind of arrange those groups, that's what I was saying about those frequently asked questions, is kind of how many children go in a group and how you look at that. So I would definitely go back to those as well to help answer some of your questions.
Jennifer, can I say something real quick?
Sure.
I think one of the things is, if you think about, we want it 5 days, but you're also meeting the needs of your students. So some students may not need something in particular, and you can have them have an independent activity. It could be some children are reading. And so, having a little activity for that child, but just meet the needs of your students. Really think about it in that respect, not just, I've got to do this, but like Sherry said, this can be fun. This should be fun, and they should be learning while they're having fun and while you're meeting their needs and finding out about what they need.
I love that. Thank you, Jill.
Here's a question from Bernice about going over the days of the week and the months of the year while teaching online. Is it forbidden? I was told I was not supposed to. I should let the pre-K specialist answer that. I will put in my 2 cents, though, Bernice, is time is just, for 4-year-olds, is all about what happens in the future, what happens in the past, and mostly what happens today. So while singing days of the week song is certainly nothing wrong with it, they're not truly going to understand what Thursday is. So we show a lot of great activities about just drawing a picture at the end of the day for calendar time. It's just not real important to talk about the month. Some or even seasons are confusing, right? So just keep it in context, keep it as concrete as possible is the main message. Always, again, refer to your IQ guides as far as rules and guidelines. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to your pre-K specialist. I think the message is time can be spent better other ways a lot of times to really teach that concept.
Absolutely.
Couple more questions here. Latasha, can I do different activities in different groups? For example, on Monday, can I do a math activity in group 1 and a language and literacy in group 2? Absolutely.
Yeah, our biggest thing is that you're using your assessment to really kind of guide what you're teaching, because, between using MAP and kind of having that path, that kind of teaching path that really guides you, and then using that class profile report, once you've started entering your information, making those ratings, it's going to become easy. It kind of takes that off of you, that you're able to look at that, and it really drives your instruction, because you're really using what you know about your children to build from there.
Yesterday, I did my first new lead teacher training. I've learned in George Pre-K, they don't encourage any worksheets. Can you explain a little bit more about that? 4-year-olds need concrete. They need the materials. They need to feel them in their hands. They need to be able to move them around, manipulate them, touch them, all of that to really learn. Worksheets in general are very abstract, and they're just really not ready for that. So you got to start with the hands-on. It's all about hands-on. Latasha, can I do the same math activity in all 3 groups? You can do the same math activity, but they want to see differentiation. They want you to differentiate across those groups. I mean, at the very beginning of the year, you might be doing the same thing with everybody because you're trying to figure it out. Devin gave a great answer in there. You can use the same materials, but just differentiate. They can do lots of, all those games on our website that Jennifer was showing you can all be differentiated so easily. So don't kill yourself gathering all those different materials, but they can do, some children can be sorting, some children can be looking at similarities and differences, some children can be patterning, so all kind of things like that you can look at.
And I mean, we shared the example of some of my kids can count one. I want to see if they can count 1 to 6. The others, I want to see, can they count to 10? If those children are already counting to 10, keep going and challenge them to count to 20. So you really want to think about, how do I do that with, like Sherry said, without changing up everything. You want to use the same game, but in different ways for those children. So Bernice had another question, Sherry. A parent sent an example of a ditto sheet. I was told I cannot upload that into WSO. Like Sherry said, those dittos are just very abstract. And the great thing about working with WSO, and we've talked about this, is that it's based on your observations of children and based on conversations. And that's the other thing about using dittos. You're really not getting a lot of conversation from that. They're coloring or they're copying or whatever, and they're, like Devin said in the chat box, they're kind of confined to those dots. That's when they're connecting the dots to write letters or something like that, more so than just letting them write and saying, tell me about what you wrote, and really getting into what the children are thinking and how they're thinking about things is a much more effective way of assessing children.
Cassie's asking, is there any goal for period 1? I'm assuming you mean as far as collecting evidence for work sampling. And the goal is, you're trying to get evidence for those math and language and literacy indicators as much as possible. We know you didn't come to training till later. You're going to do the best you can. And then the expectation is still to make ratings in all the other areas that you feel possible. And you will use DNO on those that you feel like you can't. That's a good point, Devin. Families really do help out with those dittos. Kaz is asking, who decides the goal? Well, it's the same for everybody. So everybody is trying to get all of the evidence for math and language and literacy.
And making ratings on all of the indicators.
But there's not like a benchmark that each child needs to make or whatever. You don't. Is that what she's asking instead?
I don't know. Cassie, you're welcome to unmute if you want to talk.
I was also wondering if she meant if there was a certain number. People sometimes ask if there's a certain number of pieces of evidence. So I was wondering if maybe she was thinking that too.
And I was thinking maybe, do they need to know 10 letters or this many number count to this far or whatever? Because sometimes teachers get caught up in that.
Sure. And that's all looking at those rationales and guidelines. She says, yes, I wanted to know any benchmark. No, as far as numbers, there's no specific quantity. We talked about looking at the specific indicator. If it's a big indicator, like demonstrates phonological awareness, you'll probably need a little bit more. If it's talks about speaking without contextual clues, then it's pretty low level, and you can pretty much just put that in with any piece of evidence when you've talked to a child. So again, you can refer to that MAP document. That's going to help you decide the best way to rate if that's helpful as well.
And I also think we maybe could add that, the goal is going to be at the end of the year for every child to be, proficient on everything. So we definitely want everybody to the best as they can to master all of the indicators, and be fully successful with all of those indicators and GELD standards. But we also know that that's not realistic for every child, and that we need to be aware of that reminder of, progress is progress, and there's no perfect, and that there's not going to be a situation where every single person is going to be proficient on every single thing, and that we just need to help them along the way and just help them grow. So benchmarks are going to, in a way, be different for every child because it's what their ability level is.
Sure.
Absolutely. It's a great point, Devin.
Glenore says, I have a student who I tried to assess and everything is, I don't know, I would enter anything for her. Everything is, I don't know. So how would I enter anything for her? You need to get creative. Maybe don't do verbal. Some students they get very nervous about that. They don't like being put on the spot. So instead of asking the student questions, maybe just have them, put together something or use an art collage and just leave them alone, back off kind of thing, or let them play with some manipulatives and then just see what it looks like. Maybe she gets a little pressured or something. I'm not sure. But you are welcome, when you do take dictation or thing, to say that she says she doesn't know.
Sherry, Lenore came back and said even one-on-one, she does the same thing.
Yes, I bet. I think it's probably a lack of confidence, social emotional, maybe a little immature, but I would definitely take all the pressure off. I would stop asking and maybe look at other ways you could get some information. Just have her work with a peer or the other teacher or maybe not a teacher, and just let her interact and play with materials, and you can just kind of do the stalking from afar and see what you can capture instead of if you keep getting that response.
Kazi says, I have one student who doesn't recognize any letters, numbers, or shapes. I am working on it, but haven't seen any improvement. Do I have a reason to be concerned about that child?
Definitely not yet, but keep it tiny. So focus on one shape. Walk around. Don't get into any drill and kill because that's very overwhelming for children. So just start with the circle and start putting your hands in a circle and look, I made a circle, and look over here. The rug is a circle. Look at over here. What shape is? Just concentrate on one thing, because when we start asking about multiple things, they're just not seeing it. The only letter the student should work on right now is the first letter in their name. Let them fall in love with that and write that and talk about it. And my name is S. Same with numbers. Maybe the number 4, if they're 4, they might love that. If you're talking about quantity, then just start with 1 or 2. You start very tiny. Don't go any broader than that. Keep it in a really small context for them. Any other questions from?
I am going to put mine and Sherry's email address in the chat box. I know we had it up when y'all came on, but if you came on a little bit late, that's both of our email addresses. You are welcome as you go back and you start thinking about differentiation, or you start thinking about running that class profile report and you're like, what did they say? We did record this session, so we'll get it edited and up on our YouTube channel, and we'll share a link to that. As you get in and you start having questions, or you want to ask, is this a great way to differentiate this activity? Just shoot one of us an email. We love to help, and we want to help. So please let us know what we can do to help anytime. We're happy to.